Yeah, take 2. So if you put that away. Let's start again. So thank you, Jen. Thank you for taking the time out. This is take number 2 in case you're
wondering. 5, actually.
Yeah, we're starting again. So idiotically, I decided to record without the mic on. So we're just going to run through what we discussed.
Okay.
Firstly, let's find out a little bit about you, Jen. You are a podiatrist, not a chiropodist, as I naively or idiotically thought.
No, not idiotic. It's another name for it.
Your clinic is based locally, is that correct?
West Byfleet.
So, what's the clinic called?
The Podiatry and Laser Clinic.
Podiatry and Laser
Thanks
Clinic.
for the plug.
In West Byfleet. Okay. I'll be honest, I didn't know at first that you can spend 3 years studying the intricacies of the foot and or ankle. I didn't know there was that much to learn, but obviously there is. So 3 years in university to learn about the foot.
It's not just the anatomy, it's podiatric medicine. So it's medicine related to foot problems. So, for example, someone with cerebral palsy will have foot problems. Someone with neurological problems will have foot problems. Someone with diabetes may have foot problems.
Sure.
It's all, there is enough for 3 years.
It's a lot more than I've learnt about the foot, hence why for our students I've decided to ask you to help us so we can kind of better discover and understand the human foot and ankle. So there's a few kind of key landmarks here on the foot and ankle, and I was hoping that you would shed some light.
Sure.
So these major kind of landmarks, if you could tell us what they are.
Okay, so if you look at an ankle, you see a sticky out bit on this side, which is here, a sticky out bit of bone on that side, which is here, and the sticky out bone underneath. So this long skinny bone is the fibula, and that becomes the lateral malleolus. The thicker bone, which is on the inside of the leg, the tibia, the distal tip of the tibia becomes the medial malleolus, and this chunky bone underneath is the calcaneum. And they're all connected together by very strong ligaments. And underneath the tibia, sitting in a mortise, is the talus, and that allows
that bone there.
Yeah, that allows movement. You can't got too much bits of stuff, but it allows your foot to do that.
Yes,
so it sort of
skeleton.
sits in that joint, the saddle joint.
This is actually a very typical man's joint, anyway, isn't it? It's got restriction everywhere. So,
no, it's perfect.
Yeah, exactly. So, what you mentioned earlier is something that fascinated me when I first learnt anatomy, because I genuinely thought, and it sounds silly now, that my big bone here and my even bigger bone there were just
one plug.
Yeah, just 2 individual balls, and my third ball was the heel, and somehow they were woven together with muscles and bones and ligaments. And
basically speaking, that's not massively incorrect.
Thank you for making me feel better.
But obviously that's a different bone to that one. But they are woven together with very strong fibrous retinaculae and tendon and ligaments.
This bone here is called your lateral malleolus.
Yeah.
I've always called it that big bone there because I never remember. So it's important to remember that bone there is the end part of the fibula.
Yep.
The smaller shin bone.
Skinny bone.
The skinny bone. And would that be then your medial malleoli?
Yes.
Sounds
Malleolus.
like
Malleoli is plural.
Sounds like a skin condition.
Does it?
Oh, just anyway.
Okay.
So this bone here is the end of the main shin bone, which is your tibia. Interesting. So, and what you have between there, well, obviously I can feel my ligaments there, but between there on the inside is your talus bone. Talus bone.
Well, semantics, so talus.
And behind this is your huge heel bone.
Your calcaneum.
And I'm trying to see the size of it so we can see. It is big, but it doesn't go as far back as I first thought. I thought it just carried on all the way, but that's not the case. There are How many bones in the human foot?
28 if you include the two little sesamoid bones that sit underneath the first metatarsal.
And are you saying that because in some cases they're not counted for some reason?
It's not that they're not counted, but for sort of core basic anatomy, oftentimes the two sesamoid bones aren't mentioned. It's just 26 bones in the foot. Well, they very much are bones. They're tiny, but they're very important. And you ask anyone that's fractured their sesamoid, it can be quite painful.
Yeah,
so I always think it's worth, it's important to mention them. They're like tiny, weeny little patellae. The little patella bone, but underneath the big toe.
And why does our foot have so many bones?
Well, if you think back to when we began walking the earth.
Oh, I thought you meant this conversation.
It feels like that.
It was ages ago.
Walking the earth, climbing, walking over rocks, swimming, all of the things the foot does to keep your body mobile. So the foot has to adapt to the terrain. So if you're walking on concrete, it becomes a rigid lever. If you're walking on sand or something squishy, it becomes a mobile adapter. And the whole point of the foot is to keep the rest of the skeleton mobile.
Okay, so the reason there are so many joints, bones in my foot is that it's designed to adapt to the surface. So if
what the requirements of the body are.
Okay.
Reaching, going up on your big toes, or if you're walking, if you're jumping, if you're running, there's a lot of force that goes through the foot, and I think it's the most amazing piece of natural engineering on the planet. The human foot. My sister would probably argue it's the eye, but that's what she does.
Of course, everyone. It's a bit like yoga people thinking yoga is the greatest thing on earth.
Isn't it?
Yeah, of course. Second to cricket.
Good match on Sunday, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. So the movements that are available at this particular joint, so the ankle joint, they are pointing the toes upwards.
Dorsiflexion.
And they are pointing the toes down. So dorsiflexion is when the foot points up. Is that correct?
Yep.
And plantar flexion is when you point the toe downwards. So if we think of a yoga pose, we go into dorsiflexion when we are in downward facing dog.
Yeah, you asked me earlier a good way to remember it, and it's just come to me.
We'll get onto that in a second.
Right,
Don't forget it though, because
okay.
So dorsiflexion is when we are in our downward facing dog.
Yep.
And then
Dandasana.
Yes, and then plantar flexion would be when you point the toes away in upward facing dog.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's to get people an idea of what we're talking about. Now, to clear something up for me, Jen, when you are sat in Dandasana with your foot like this, or when you're standing like this, are you in neutral or are you in dorsiflexion?
Neutral what?
It's in a neutral plane of existence.
Okay, if you're just still and not mobile and standing, if you start to move, as soon as you move forward, the foot goes into dorsiflexion, doesn't it?
Sure.
If you're in Dandasana, then you're actively firing your anterior muscles to flex your dorsiflexion.
If you didn't, they would just kind of
flop.
Okay. And that's not technically plantar flexion because you haven't created it, it's just happened.
It's just that's a relaxed sort of neither plantar or dorsal.
Okay, so it's just for the anatomy students because I do argue them quite a bit when they say this is dorsiflexion and I'm like, it's just neutral.
What do they say is just dorsiflexion?
Just this. Oh, hang on, what's happened to my knee? Have I just broke it? Oh, wow, what have I done here? Anyway, carry on, Jen, whilst I fix my knee. Whilst I fix my knee.
If you're just standing,
there we go.
You could say the foot's in neutral, but as soon as you start to walk, that's going to happen.
Sure.
That movement, and that is
dorsiflexion. Okay. So dorsiflexion and plantar flexion are different movements.
Yes.
Dorsiflexion again pointing toes up. Plantar flexion pointing the toes down.
I'm going to be really pedantic here.
Okay? Yeah, you can be pedantic. I don't really know what that means.
Right. So I want to get away from pointing toes up because you could be in a plantar flex position pointing your toes up.
Absolutely correct.
So if you're dorsiflexing the foot, You're talking about the foot collector.
I love how you've just schooled me in front of all my students. I don't know what I'm talking about.
He does. He's very clever.
No. Okay, so.
But do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So if my foot points up, that's dorsiflexion.
Yes.
When the foot points down, plantar flexion. How can our students remember that? What's the? Is there a secret way?
It just came to me. So if you imagine you've got a fin on top of your foot.
A fin?
A dorsal fin.
Why would I have a dorsal fin?
Because when you want your foot to go swimming, your dorsal fin will dorsiflex. I've just made that up. It's quite good though, isn't it?
I don't know. We'll see.
Dorsiflex. We'll use that. Pretend they've got a fin on the back of their foot.
We'll see.
And when they bring the fin towards the tibia, that's dorsiflexion.
Okay, well, I will pass it on. They'll see it, and let's see if it works. Because we need to find something. Because I'll be honest, that is the most complicated one.
Really?
Actually, it's very close with the shoulder flexion extension because it's not as straightforward as some of the others. For the students to remember, dorsiflexion and plantar flexion is the most awkward, the most confusing, and the one on the anatomy papers that most people get wrong. So.
Well, another one could be plantar flexion point. P, plantar flexion point.
There we go. There's the moment of genius I was waiting for. I knew you had it in you, Jen.
You probably knew that already.
No, I didn't. I never thought of that. So plantar flexion is when you point. Dorsiflexion, I guess, is when you don't. But yeah, excellent. That's
as long as you've got a cue for one way, the opposite is the other one.
Yes, for sure. That is worth this video alone, to be honest with you. I'm not just.
Thank you.
Yeah, I know I can be very sarcastic, but I'm not, because that has confused a lot of people in the past, and there's probably some people thinking, well, obviously, duh. I just never thought of it. So we have a arch on the inside of our foot, just there.
You have three.
We have three arches. Now I won't talk. It's about you. Tell us a little about these arches, and then if you could tell us about the relevance of these arches in the standing yoga poses.
Okay, so to keep it simple, the three main arches of the foot are the inner longitudinal arch, this arch.
The inner longitudinal arch.
Yep, because it's on the inside and it's long.
Genius.
You have a lateral longitudinal arch.
Lateral to the outside, a lateral longitudinal arch on the outside.
And then there is the transverse arch.
Transverse arch.
Some people call it the metatarsal arch, but it's the transverse arch. But the one of most importance, particularly for yoga, is the inner longitudinal arch. The
inner longitudinal arch. So this is my right foot on the inside. So left foot on the inside, that long arch. And what I tend to notice a lot, I look at feet quite a lot in class.
Me too.
You have to, because
I feel like leaving my cards on people's mats.
Yeah.
Sorry. Get those calluses done.
There are so many people who don't know that their arch has fallen inwards. I'm not going to say collapsed, because you don't like that. Is it? Okay. The arch.
Lower profile.
We'll say collapsed. Okay. So what I mean by that is, if you can see my feet here in the video.
You'd be better taking your socks off so people can see your feet properly.
Okay. If you could hold that. My wife always makes fun of my hobbit feet, but hopefully my students won't. So if you could see there, this is what I see most often. My arches have fallen inwards, and look what happens to the knees at the same time. If I stand on one leg, how can I balance with my left arch collapsed and my left knee fallen inwards? So that's quite a common. So before we talk about it relevant to yoga poses, it's a lot more common than I realised. And is that genetic, or is that down to our choice of footwear? Or a combination?
A combination, but predominantly genetics. I mean, we inherit so much in a DNA. You can inherit the DNA from bunions. You can inherit all sorts of things in the foot.
Sorry, did you just say you can inherit? You could inherit bunions.
Well, it's in your DNA, because years ago they used to accuse ladies of wearing shoes that were too small, Pre or
Not
post,
only years ago, I still do that now.
pre and post wear footwear. Obviously, people didn't have much choices. Kids were given hand-me-down shoes. And then I think it was in the late 80s, they discovered the gene that causes bunions. So when a patient comes in now for the first time and I see a bunion or something near to a bunion, I'll say, well, who else in the family's got feet like this? And oftentimes, if it's a teenager and they're there with mum, I say, take your shoes off, let's have a look. And you can see there is it's in the genes. You know.
Wow, I had no idea.
So it'd be interesting to see what yours...
I always just thought it was down to the fancy foot.
It doesn't. Don't get me wrong. You're not completely wrong, because a lot of people don't wear the right size shoes. Nobody measures adults' feet really anymore, and you can have someone with a bunion, quite famously, I think Victoria Beckham, wearing high heels that are very restricted. That's going to exacerbate things. That's going to force a joint even more so into an unstable position.
Okay.
You can have them operated on. There's over 120 procedures for that part of the foot alone.
Sounds painful.
But your bunion on your right foot might be different from your bunion on your left foot.
I've noticed a lot. Something that you mentioned earlier. Trying to think now what you said about the foot, about bunions.
Genetics.
We'll come back to it. Just very similar to how you had a moment of illumination earlier, and you suddenly. I'm sure I'll be the same.
I'm sure you will.
So, when this longitudinal arch kind of fall inwards or collapses, how does that affect us in our? Well, I just kind of showed you how it affects us in balancing, but in the yoga poses, I imagine it's going to create an accumulative problem.
It can do, but I think you need to first step back and see what a foot does. Because if someone comes to a class for an hour a day, what are they doing in the rest of the day? What shoes are they wearing? Yoga's barefoot. So if they wear an orthotic, there's no orthotic in their yoga. Yeah. Plus the fact, the foot falling in, or as you say, collapsing, is a normal part of a gait cycle. So your heel will hit the floor, a little bit of pronation will happen. With some people it's a bit excessive, and what happens when it's excessive is that the knee starts to internally rotate. So you can see this when you watch people go through their asana practice, and you can pick out the feet that I've got lots of patients who've got really bad bunions, but they've got such strength in their feet. Their stability is good. So in terms of if it's a very flat foot, if it's a very collapsed foot, that person who's never done yoga before or just a beginner might struggle with any asana practice with balancing on one leg. So I'll encourage people to strengthen that part of their foot. I mean, what does maintain the inner longitudinal arch? Well, the main thing is the plantar fascia, which is fibrous tendon that goes from various parts of the heel bone, and it extends towards lots of places in the forefoot, keeping this simple. And its job is to maintain that medial arch.
Okay.
It's one of the most important parts of the foot. And if you've got someone who's, through genetics, got a very flat foot, then that plantar fascia might be quite stretched and not do the job it could do. You've also got 4 layers of muscle in the bottom of your foot. So encouraging people, even in a yoga class, to do strengthening exercise. I'd get people into Tadasana, and I'll get them to feel the weight in both feet, bend their toes up, place their toes down, and then actually do a forward fold and feel themselves lengthening the toes out so they feel rooted through their feet. And when they're like that, then I'll get them to I'll just say, try and imagine you've got little fish hooks, this sounds horrible, on the inside of your arch, and you're standing there, and I want you to pretend you're pulling those fish hooks up. Okay. And another good way of doing it is if they're like that, and you get them to almost, feet are still, and you get them to pull their legs apart. You can almost see the profile increasing, but you need it to be intrinsic. It needs the strength needs to come through the foot, and that's not going to happen overnight. But one of the nicest things you can do to a new person in your class is not make them feel embarrassed about it, but this can help.
What are you trying to say?
Well, you have orthotics and things, don't you? So
you're not anymore.
Have you got enough strength? That's fantastic. I've had a few people that don't need it anymore because they've got...
I'll be honest. I only wear them in my shoes when I go out because they do hurt my feet if I don't. But most of the time I'm barefoot or I'm wearing socks. I'm around here at home, so I feel like I don't need them anymore. And it has made make a huge difference to my right knee because
at the time?
Yeah, because my arch was falling inwards and I could see that on my trainers. Yeah. And so I went to the running shop, just got a basic insert in my foot, in my shoe. The difference in my right knee.
Very simple, yeah.
It's
absolutely
incredible.
Very simple. But the more, especially with kids and a developing foot, the more you can get them to run around barefoot, it helps to build proprioception, strength in the foot. And with adults, if you're doing most of your walking about barefoot, you're probably working your foot out better than it would be sat in a shoe. Yeah.
You said something earlier when I teach. You're a yoga teacher as well, are you, Jen?
I happen to be trained by you and Christine. Thank you very much.
Just throwing that in there.
Oh, it was the best thing I did in the last 10 years.
You don't have to say that for the camera, Jen. It's fine.
It is though. It's something I do every day. It's become a discipline.
Oh, you do yoga every day?
Every morning.
Wow, more yogic than I am.
No. I just fling myself around and then think, I'll share that on Instagram. No, I won't. But no, it helps to, because I'm quite high energy and I love my job and I love what I do and I love everything about being a podiatrist. But the yoga feeds me in a different way. It grounds me. It helps me stay calm where otherwise I'd have struggled, using my breath. Sure. And my position where, I can spend all day, if I'm doing nail surgery, I'm over like this. With the yoga, I'm mindful now to make sure I'm engaging muscles that have used to be like that. When I first started classes, I was like, my shoulders. But I don't get problems like that.
Brilliant. Getting back to the foot. So, when you are in your Warrior 3, you're doing a standing balancing posture. There are a lot of people who, when you look at their foot is shaking, wobbling, it affects their knee, they decide to bend the knee, they decide to lower themselves down towards the floor. And when I look at the foot, or when I look at them, all I do is see a problem in their foot inherently. Is that...
Does your foot not wobble a little bit?
Of course not, Jennifer. I'm offended.
When you're in that, because the subtle movements within the body, you've got muscles firing. And if it didn't move, it's like the CN Tower. If it didn't have a little bit of flexibility, it would fall over.
Sure, absolutely.
So I hear what you're saying about bending the knee and everything falls apart. But if your foot position is right, if when you go into a pose and you prepare for it, not just, I'll take my left foot away because then everything falls apart. Yeah. If you engage the weight in that foot first and then take the left foot away.
So the key would be to think about the foot before you do the pose rather than trying to correct too much of what the foot might be doing wrong whilst you're in the pose.
Yeah, I find for any standing asanas, if your foot position is right, then everything seems to flow.
Sure.
When I fall over, it's because I didn't take time.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a huge problem with our yoga poses. It's very similar to boat pose, where people they go into boat and they go looking for core, which isn't there. They end up using the wrong muscles. The key, I always say, is you find what is your core in that particular movement, and then you create your boat pose from there. So I guess it's exactly the same as your standing poses. If you think about your feet, if you think about what they're doing, and then create the pose. Some people have no anatomical understanding of their foot, but just by thinking about the foot and stretching,
getting some awareness,
is all they need, isn't it?
Also, because you have 2 feet, and a lot of standing poses are done with 2 feet. As soon as you start to transfer weight into 1 foot, you have to think, what's going on above the foot? Has that person had a knee replacement? Is there naturally more weight taken in 1 foot than the other during their everyday walking day? So to go into a one-legged pose, it has to be from a safe 2-legged like Tadasana, equal weight balance. I mean, you're good at doing that, weight forward, weight to the side, and get them to find.
That's my favourite dance move.
Really?
No.
I thought it was breakdancing on your head.
Yeah. So mountain pose, that would be then the most important pose that precedes any standing balancing pose.
I think so. When I started my teacher training a couple of years ago with you guys, I thought it was just so boring. And then
you met me, the wise oracle.
It was Chris, actually.
Oh.
Sorry. The more I did it, the more I learned how important it is. And I used to bore students in here, just getting them in mountain pose before we did anything else.
Sure.
And it's important to remember when you're in there, going back to that medial arch, engage it, almost feel like you're pulling your big toe pulse backwards and you're firing that arch. Because if the foot is that strong, in that strong anchored position, it's your root, isn't it? If you're rooted to the ground, you're not going to fall over. Your foot might, it's got to do that, hasn't it? It's got to keep its balance.
Sure.
When you're moving into, say, Warrior 3, bringing your arms out, your foot's got to adapt to what's going on above. But if foot position is strong, and, we're talking about perfect feet in many respects. A lot of people, the left foot is very different from the right foot. They've got a problem with the left foot, not the right foot. And so their sense of balance is going to be different. And I think there is, I think I mentioned to you recently, when you're doing your anatomy training for the TT, you've got this perfect skeleton. It's not got it might have a scoliosis, but it's pretty much there's nobody that looks like that in a class. They've got like big shoulders, round shoulders, they haven't got a neck. Those people that are really kind of quite stout, and lots of people have bow legs, which is going to massively affect what goes on at the ankle. Some people have knock knees, and getting someone with really bad knock knees to go from Tadasana to, say, tree, you can see it almost the whole inside the foot happening, and how they can counterbalance at the hip. Also, women that have had multiple pregnancies, you'll find that their foot position will change throughout the pregnancies. I'm sure you've seen it with Laura's. I think feet are great. I think they're amazing pieces of equipment, and I think they're really undervalued.
When it comes to yoga, I couldn't agree with you more. And that is not just based on my own experience, but some of the feedback I've had, Jen, from some of the students who've done our beginners course with me, who've been doing yoga for 3 or 4 years, but lost a bit of confidence, maybe through an injury, come back to yoga. And the first thing I'll do is teach them to stand up in mountain, distribute their weight, stretch their feet. Just allow your feet to stretch rather than treating them as these compressed, suffering little creatures in your footwear. And the difference in their standing poses from that point onward, because they feel, wow, I wasn't taught anything new today about a subject. I was just encouraged to allow my feet to stretch. And the difference it makes to people's practice is incredible.
There's also the main things that can affect that as well. For example, the muscles around the back of the lower leg. If you're wearing high heels all day and your foot's in that position.
And that is plantar flexion, because you're pointing. Yeah.
Your foot's in that position all day. And then you go to a yoga class, the back of your leg is going to hurt, because it's not necessarily that you're shrinking your calf muscles, but they haven't been allowed to stretch throughout the day.
So they remain in a position which they become accustomed to, and you have to really encourage them to lengthen, and they're being stubborn, correct?
Yeah. Sometimes you can hear some people say, well, I'm more comfortable in heels. That's because they don't have to stretch their heel bone to the ground, and the Achilles tendon, which is an extension of the muscles at the back of the leg, hasn't stretched. Obviously stretching the tendon isn't a good idea, because you can pop it. You need to stretch the muscles, and I think a little bit of awareness of that, just plant seeds of awareness in people, and it's amazing what they can. Oh yeah, okay, I get that.
In terms of the yoga practice, what's the kind of best stretch for that calf muscle?
It depends on
always depends on the person.
It depends on the person, but I think, I mean, I get patients now. I feel qualified to be able to do so. I'll sit in the clinic and show them passive and eccentric calf stretches. So first thing in the morning, sometimes people can find they've got pain under their heel, and that could be a tight plantar fascia, that sort of long ligament, that fibrous ligament that helps to support that medial arch. And if they're getting pain there, and I'll give them stretches for the calf, they'll go, well, I've got pain there, why are you giving me? And it's because if the calf muscle is tight, it's going to have an effect on that ankle. It is unable to dorsiflex as much as it should. The foot will compensate by excessively pronating, stretching out the plantar fascia, causing heel pain. So gentle yoga type stretches, and I'll get them to breathe into it.
What particular ones? We're talking yoga poses. We don't want to talk about anything that's not...
Down dog, that's a good calf stretch.
Yeah.
Gentle forward fold, but then depends on the individual.
Stretch my calf because everything else is screaming, and then until they stop screaming I won't feel it there. So I see what you mean, but in general you'd say a downward dog forward fold should be a nice enough stretch for the calf.
It can be. I mean, you'll find some people kind of, I think it's quite cute when they say if you want to walk your dog, because that's I knew you'd bark at that, but I love it because it's really, I've got permission now to go like that with my heels. It feels nice.
I don't even think it's called. Is it called walk the dog, or is it called like paddle your dog, or
either, whatever? It's just nice.
Whatever. But the reason I cannot stand it as a practice, right, is, and literally cannot stand it, is because most people in class think that they are stretching their calf because they feel a sensation when they paddle their dog, and it's just their sciatic nerve. And then afterwards they go, is it here? I feel something in my backside. I'm like, really? It's because you do this idiotic thing, which all yoga teachers love to do, but rarely does it stretch your calf. If you get a group of men in your class, I guarantee every single man in there is not stretching their calf. They are just exciting their sciatic nerve and then irritating their sciatic nerve. Yeah.
I mean,
but anyway, for someone like you, paddling the dog is just fine, I guess.
I think it's quite. I can't remember who. It might have been Chris but it's quite a nice.
Oh, if it's anything crazy, it's probably Chris. Yeah.
Poor Chris. In the best stretch for a calf is an eccentric stretch. So off the first step of the stair. I mean, you're not going to be doing that. Well, you could actually use a block, couldn't you, and allow the heel to drop off the block, but they need to be able to allow that heel to drop without causing any trauma to the Achilles tendon. Sure. Has to be. Only muscles should stretch.
So when you're stretching your calf, you want to ensure that the stretch is felt around the calf, not the ends of the joints.
No, because you can't. The tendons and ligaments don't have much stretch. The stretch needs to come from the muscle belly. Sure. And I think since I've been, because I'll give patients stretching and strengthening exercises, and since I've done my TT, it's really nice to bespoke them, to get them to really feel where that stretch is coming from.
Okay.
So passive ones, like first thing in the morning, lying in bed, dorsiflexing the foot. Actually just sitting there dorsiflexing your foot is a passive stretch, really. I mean, there's lots of things in different asanas that can help stretch the calf.
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess this is the important thing to help students understand is, we don't have it here, but you can obviously see this for yourself, is the size of the calf muscle itself, and remembering that the calf muscle is what you're trying to stretch, and you're trying to avoid stretching.
You must never cause strain to the Achilles tendon.
It's a huge tendon. Is it the biggest tendon in the body?
Most powerful as well.
It's quite delicate at the same time, based on what we put it through. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of the most important parts of the whole human body.
So it starts from just slightly at the bottom, is that correct? Or it starts from here and goes...
It develops as a result of a combination of the calf muscles, which there's a few, which I'm sure you know.
And it extends from the calf and continues.
From gastrocnemius, and it feeds into the posterior aspect of the heel. Now, it used to be believed that it was quite limited, but research on cadavers have suggested that its fibrous attachment extend over a lot of the surface of the heel, and it can vary from person to person. You know, there's lots of anatomical variations. There is, and I'm correcting myself here, there are some people's feet with extra bones, accessory bones.
I don't know why I'm surprised, because the more over the years, the more I've learnt about anatomy, the more I've discovered what anomalies everyone seems to have.
Yeah,
there is just no one structure.
And we don't know until we start sort of, you know, it's wonderful that people leave their body to medical research, but it's extraordinary how many different things can vary from foot to foot. There's quite a relatively newish sort of procedure called a hypercure, whereby they can sort people's flat feet out by basically just putting, it looks like a big tic tac. It's a plug in that side of the foot that helps the foot to go from a flat bit to a more of an arched foot.
Really? Wow.
The developments are just amazing with the foot, and there's lots of bones to play with.
What is that?
That's your plantar fascia, but it's a little bit.
It's a bit smaller than
mainly from here up to. There's lots of.
And you hear that a lot amongst some of the girls who come to the studio. I don't know why I say girls, because I guess they generally are runners who say, "I've got plantar fasciitis." Mm-hmm. Plantar fasciitis.
Yeah.
What is that, Jen?
Anything with itis means inflammation. This is the plantar part of your foot, and this is the plantar fascia. So plantar fasciitis is when there's been too much strain for whatever reason, faulty foot mechanics, tight calf muscles, sports injury. Sometimes people that are pushing up really, really heavy weights and they're not in supportive enough shoes. On a microscopic level, a fibrous attachment of the plantar fascia.
When you say fibrous attachment, what would that mean to
If you were looking at a plantar fascia through a microscope, imagine the knit of cotton, just lots of little bits of fibres.
Yeah.
So you could get, where you probably get the most strain, you'd get a little rupture of that fibre, and that would cause a microscopic bleed.
Okay.
Sets up the inflammatory process, pain. Tends to be worse first thing in the morning, because when you lie in bed, you're horizontal, so blood flow to the foot's much better. Healing happens, you get up, and the whole cycle starts again. So yeah, it's a real problem, and the longer it's ignored, the more, because obviously when something heals, you get a bit of scar tissue. So unless it's addressed, you could end up with a.
What's the best thing? I mean, I hear it so often. I've got plantar fasciitis. Something like.
Okay.
I don't say anything because I don't know what I'm expected to say.
Why do they tell you?
Because they're coming to a yoga class.
Okay.
And I'm like, well, you've got it, not me. You know your body better than I do. Although we know with most people that's not always the case.
Yeah.
They're so unbodily aware. But I said, well, you know your body, get on with it. So not that I'm going to tell anyone what to do based on what you're about to say, but in general, for anyone who may have suffered from or suffers from, what's the best thing to do? Ice.
Get it diagnosed properly.
Why, for those who are watching, the students are fairly new. Why ice inflammation?
It helps to reduce the amount of inflammation. Inflammation is hot, so it helps to reduce that. It's also, I mean, it's used everywhere, isn't it? Good old-fashioned ice. So ice it 20 minutes, 3 times a day. There's a sort of an acronym which is PRICE, so you protect it.
Are people still using price?
Yeah.
I learned that 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And it's still
still relevant. Ice it, compress it, we'll strap feet up just to alter the foot function. What, in a nutshell, needs to happen is less load on that plantar fascia.
To desensitize the pain?
No, that's an adjunct to it. But if you're getting plantar fasciitis, it's a symptom. And it's a symptom of faulty foot function, usually because of tight calf muscles.
Okay, so it's not something that's happened through repetitive action. It's faulty. Okay.
It can.
More likely faulty.
Yeah, but you find guys that walk on the golf course 3 or 4 times a week. That's 4 hours at a time. And if they've got not the best foot function, but it's all right, then all of a sudden they get a bit of plantar fasciitis, then they'll start compensating for it. And unless they rest and let it heal and then address why has that happened, might be tight calf muscles, then it's going to keep happening.
What's the best way to address that? To see a professional? Yeah, come and see it.
But also, look at your footwear.
Okay.
Are you wearing high heels a lot? Because if you are, that can contribute towards it if you're not stretching out. Also, you'll get elite sports people, and they're not going to want 6 weeks off. They want you to sort it out as soon as possible. Sure.
Thing is you know,
don't go straight to have steroid injections. Do other things.
And don't
first.
ask your yoga teacher what you should do, because 99% of yoga teachers, unless they're a podiatrist, are not qualified to give you that kind of information, which is a lot of people do forget. You know,
but
they
even
think
though
their yoga teacher has all the answers.
Even though I teach yoga, I think I'm a yoga teacher in that capacity. If I'm teaching here or teaching wherever else, I'm a yoga teacher, and that's the capacity I'm in. But
your scope of practice does go beyond that too.
For sure.
So you can still recommend and give that kind of information to people. I guess what I'm trying to get our students to understand is, so many people have come to me asking me what they should do for their plantar fasciitis, and I say I have no idea. And they look at me like, oh, I thought you knew a thing or two, and they walk away, and I just think.
But you do.
It's beyond my scope of practice.
But you don't want to be their doctor.
No, exactly, because I know what to do if I had the problem, but it's beyond my scope of practice as a yoga teacher to start telling people what they should be doing on their injuries. Because most yoga teachers will say, try downward dog. Or,
Yeah, I hear what you're saying.
And it's important for our students to understand is that when we are getting people asking us about the various problems about the foot and ankle, to say, again, it is beyond our scope of practice. You should see someone who's a professional in that area.
Absolutely.
And
don't ignore it.
Yeah, and the reason we bring you up, Jen, is for a long time, I didn't even know a podiatrist existed. I mean, why would I? Until something happens to your foot or...
You don't know.
No, you don't know. So...
Well, you've experienced that, haven't you, with your own sort of foot issues. But anything to do with the foot, believe it or not, a foot that tends to be quite flat, that can be a contributing factor to an ingrown toenail. Faulty foot mechanics. It's not the sole reason, but it can bear weight in it.
So, in standing poses, the key is to
Not standing there.
equally distribute the weight across that tripod, the 3 points of weight distribution, and stretch your feet. And if you can manage that, and then the pose can be built on a really firm foundation.
Yes, absolutely.
When we come to seated, there are some asanas that can cause people various problems around the ankle. So what ones are they, if you could just wax lyrical on those for me?
Okay, so what I can only relate it to me.
Absolutely.
And what I've found. Sometimes when I was going into reclined hero, I found that really uncomfortable. Until I got used to it. Things like camel pose, when you're on your toes, that can be quite uncomfortable. And some seated poses, I'm doing a bit more now because I'm doing a bit of Ashtanga, is, like you often say, don't wreck your body for the glory of the pose. And it's so
But when you do Ashtanga, that's part and parcel of what you do.
No, I don't. I fall about and all sorts. Probably the things that I've really hammered my feet in certain yoga because I wanted to do it and I've come down wrong or done something wrong. But one of the classes, even in Lotus, some people will really pull their foot that way, and you should be guiding the lower leg. And if you're having to yank your foot that way, you're stressing and straining all those, and they are quite flimsy tendons on the outside of the ankle. And what's amazing about the ankle itself is this retinaculae, which is like fibrous band. It goes from the medial to the lateral malleolus and below, and its job is to stop all your tendons bowstringing. Now, how amazing is that? And then if you're pulling your foot in that position, if it doesn't hurt and you're fine and your foot's strong, great. But if you're new to something like that and you're forcing your foot up, that can just be too much. Same with fire log. And that can be maybe your hip's not open.
Yeah, sure.
Those sort of things.
So we're trying to use our foot to try and get us into various poses when the movement should be coming from an area. But perhaps that area is stiff, and then we think we can make up for it with our foot.
Yes.
And all we do is we compromise so much, gaining very little.
And for the ankle itself, the medial side of the ankle, you've got a very square deltoid ligament that creates a hell of a lot of stability. Conversely, the outside of the ankle, you've got quite flimsy ligaments. So by nature of human walking anyway, what's more common than anything else are lateral ankle sprains.
Sure.
And there's lots of different feet in yoga. Some feet that I assume would be a problem aren't, because the person's adapted and strengthened their feet. Where I've had foot injuries and I thought, oh man, is if I've gone from a handstand and I've tried to go straight to plank and I've just come down on my toe, and I'm just, oh my God, I'm obviously not ready. Or I was just pushing myself too much. But foot injury, you need to look after your foot, because if you bugger your foot up, you're not going to do many standing poses for a while, are you?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's a little bit of awareness that's needed. I mean, this is the key thing. People always ask here, what can I do differently? And I just say, just think. So when you are taking your foot into lotus or these various positions, just think, where is the movement coming from? Where should it come from? And why are you putting so much pressure on the feet? I see that more so, because obviously I don't teach lotus, I see that in cradle. You know, here, this, to get the foot in. Yeah. Because it's easier than that is. Yeah. So that causes so many problems in itself. Absolutely. So remembering that we actually probably need more stability here rather than trying to make it so much more flexible, would you say?
Yeah, interestingly, Claire Berghoff recently said something which I thought was great. She said, rather than focusing on, when you're doing that, in order to protect the ankle, make sure you're engaging these muscles to keep keep the foot strong. So if you dorsiflex your foot in that position, it's a much stronger position than that, isn't it?
Sure.
So there's lots of little subtleties, I think, that can come about. With regards to sort of down dog, if someone's got a limitation in this joint, they're going to find that painful. And I think adapting your practice. The same with up dog. If someone's got an ingrown toenail, they're not going to like an up dog, are they? Because you're just going to force the nail into the tissues a little bit more.
Ouch.
I think the feet are amazing. And I think without sort of good foot foundations, you'll struggle with a lot of founding poses. And you said that in one of our first TT weekends, that, it's ground your feet.
I remember, because you sent me a detailed PDF reminding me of all the little details I got wrong. Do you remember that? That was so funny. But it was needed.
Do you know what? That night I was thinking, shit, I hope I got that right. I hope I haven't been just like, ooh.
No, it was interesting. There were minor things, but
that was
they
about
actually,
the sesamoids, wasn't it?
Yeah, but actually,
why have they left those little bones? My little bones.
Actually, it was needed, but it becomes very difficult as a yoga teacher or training provider to say, what do we start with today? Do we start with the feet? Do we start by helping you understand the pelvis? What is anterior, posterior? Because so many of the poses, you need a fundamental understanding of what is an anterior tilt, what is a posterior tilt.
Absolutely.
Then you think, okay, every pose needs a foundation, and it's not always the feet. Yep. So, but where do we go? So I was like, right, we're just going to start with feet. We're gonna work upwards. But you were obviously looking at me very differently, with a very inquisitive, right, I'm mentally correcting everything he's saying, but everyone else was like this. They were completely fascinated because they had no idea the relevance of their foot in yoga poses. And I remember teaching them all Warrior 3, and I didn't tell them to use their foot. I just said, based on your new understanding of what you think your foot should be doing, do Warrior 3. And every one of them was like, wow. Because it makes a huge difference, doesn't it? And some of the Warrior 2s, Warrior 1s, the position of your foot. If it's like this, you have a foundation. If they, boom.
But also weight distribution being even. And I think I used to struggle in Warrior 1. Just thinking, my heel's going to my heel. And it's playing with that position and knowing where your strength is. Is it equal? But also, where is the weight going through your foot? And that's really important in all of the standing poses, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You can spend the whole time you're in the pose not even worrying about lifting and raising the arms. You can just spend the whole time getting the feet right.
Absolutely.
And some people do spend the whole time working on their feet, which I think you have to do, because otherwise you're just creating a shape for no reason. The foundation of standing pose is the feet.
I always think it's good to actually get people to imagine that they're standing on a carpet of grass and they're a tree and there's roots that they're feeding down into the ground.
Such a yogic thing to say, Jen.
That's what I did that's what I used to do when I was in here. So right, I want you to breathe some water up through your roots and get them breathing to strengthen their pose. But you could see as the class went on, when we went on to build up to a peak standing pose, and it was like, if there's just one thing they can take.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
That foot stability, or being aware of their foot position, is really important.
I think it is mentioned in some of the. Haven't done many yoga classes in my life, believe it or not, but I have seen a few yoga classes online. I haven't done many actually. I obviously I can't because of my back. I avoid it. I prefer to do yoga by myself. But what I have seen are people try to talk to us about their feet, but it's the way they say things that make the student unsure of what's going on.
What, confusing them?
Yeah, root, all the yoga terminologies, root through this, ground through this, do that. What you said earlier was something I never heard before, so it's an exclusive thing to how you would get your students to understand the benefit of the feet. Yoga teachers often would use a pre-rehearsed dialogue, which has been passed down from somebody. So they may talk to us about feet in yoga classes, but unless the language is understood, it has no purpose.
Absolutely. I mean, when you say to people who don't know anything about the foot, but they walk, they wear shoes, they've got a job, they might be a runner, just stand on both feet equally, they might think, oh, that's just taking the weight on the heels. And then once you sort of get them to have a little bit of awareness of it, I'm talking about in yoga things. One thing I really struggle with, even now, is a really wide stance when you're doing a forward fold. In Ashtanga, there's a few of them to do that. And my muscles at the sides of my legs feeding into the axle on my ankles just kill me. And I get up a little bit, bend my knees, go back to it. So that's another one. I think if you're not ready or strong enough for it, you can. In
that pose, you do know that you wouldn't burn in Ashtanga hell if you just turned your foot out slightly. If you.
Been to Claire's class.
Just kidding. This whole pigeon toe your feet is completely.
No, not even with pigeon. Even with just your feet at 12 o'clock. If you're really wide and you're doing lots of forward folds and up and then grabbing the big toes, that's such a strain on the lateral.
I know, and I'm not dissing anyone's practice or Ashtanga at all, but there is an argument to be made that the reason it's uncomfortable because it's not actually a correct movement. When you step out, your foot should turn out ever slightly to accommodate the hip as the hip is turning.
Yeah, I could see
it's
that.
It's a little bit. But, who am I to argue with the Ashtanga world?
No, you just think you're a yoga teacher.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not allowed to have my own opinion. This is yoga. We should all go by the yogic law.
Since I've been doing, the inception of the TT and focusing on my own personal practice, I know my own, and I'm a runner, I've been doing yoga for years, I know my own foot has changed in a good way, stronger, more secure, more stable. And I think that is through yoga.
And that would help you with running.
Oh, for sure.
So this is the
running
important
doesn't help
thing.
the yoga because your hamstrings go tight.
But we have a lot of students who come here are runners, and trying to get them to understand is that I always say that they don't need to overstretch certain muscles. They just need to know how to use their feet better, and that will help them stretch as much as, not perhaps as much as they need to, because runners don't need to stretch as much as they think. But it's not actually the stretching that benefits runners, I think. It's more, they become much more aware of weight distribution, feet, toes, ankles. That's my opinion.
A lot of runners change their cadence as well, they'll change their stride. And if you do 10k, you'll sometimes play with how fast you're running, how long your stance is, how much you bring the knees up. And that circuits awareness, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Definitely.
So on a final note, Jen, it's been really, really interesting, really fascinating. I hope we can do a follow-up at some stage.
Sure.
I'll have some interesting questions for you this time. What I wanted is I didn't want to confuse students by asking questions which are more relevant to what I'm learning. So if we can have a foundational understanding, and then perhaps we can build on that as time goes on. It's been great. Like Jen mentioned, she has her clinic over in West Byfleet. The link you can find below at the bottom.
Thank you.
On the description page, or description bit, I think that is. So, as a final summary of the foot and ankle, what would you say the yoga students who are going to be learning about the foot and ankle, what do you think they need to learn and remember?
What creates stability? Above the ankle and below the ankle. And the structures around it. It's the foundation. If you see it as a foundation to pretty much all your standing poses, I think, because that was my nutshell. Great, now I won't fall over as much. Now I'll get my feet rooted. So I think I don't think you need more than that, really.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. More time that is spent on the foundation, the better the finishing structure will be.
For sure.
And I look at some warrior threes and some balancing poses, and the gracefulness is only present because of the foot. And I look down at the foot, and the foot is moving, but not, it's not collapsing like others. The toes are stretched, and the foot is, I don't want to be yogic and say connected to the earth, but you know what I mean. It's got that.
What's really good for the foot, though, and you can even do it while you're having your breakfast or at work, is to imagine you're picking something up with your toes.
Well, I think you're overestimating the...
I bet you can. Have a go.
I think you're overestimating the multitasking skills of people here to have breakfast and do this exercise.
Yeah, but if you keep your heels on the ground and imagine you're pulling the floor towards you...
And what's this doing?
That's helping to strengthen the inner longitudinal arch. And it's exercise we give for kids.
So my heel...
The listening foot.
The listening foot. So my heels are down and I'm imagining that I'm lifting up my keys. Is that what you said, keys?
Yes. Or you could keep your...
Well, I've got a tic-tac and I need to pick up.
Yeah, or you could keep what yogis refer to as the big toe man, the first metaphor.
Who says that? The big toe man.
Toe mound. Don't you say it? Isn't it?
No.
Okay, well, I've heard somebody say
Don't call me a yogi.
But
I'm
imagine
deeply
that
offended.
You're dragging your toes towards you, and anything you can do to strengthen that inner arch benefits anything that you're doing when you're standing.
I will be doing that when I have my breakfast tomorrow. And if Laura says, darling, what on earth are you doing, I'm going to blame you.
You know what we do with kids with really flat feet? I'll say, right, I'm going to plant a seed. You clean your teeth twice a day, don't you? And they go, yes.